Hi everybody, welcome back to episode 22 of the Backseat Fighter podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Bins, and I'm so excited to be back recording, speaking to all of you, back in the community. I'm back ready for the fight night this weekend. But let me ask you a question first. What do you call a deer with no eyes? You're thinking no idea, right? Well, that's just very ableist of you. It's still a deer. I only asked that because I have another question for you. What do you call the best MMA podcaster in the game that only has one shoulder? It's still the best MMA podcaster in the game. It's still me, right? I dislocated my shoulder last night. I'm in severe pain. I think I've torn my labrum for the second time in this shoulder. Not great, but I've got my latte. We've got the UFC blockbuster pay-per-view this weekend, and I'm just so excited to be breaking it down back on the podcast. So, Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev, UFC 313. This is such a banging fight. We have been waiting so long for this matchup ever since, before that Khalil Roundtree last victory by Pereira, that dominant clinical victory. But what am I talking about? I mean, this is a very interesting fight because a lot of people think Ankalaev has the skills, that has the ability to challenge Pereira in the octagon this weekend. And we're going to break it down. Obviously, we've got some other amazing fights on the card. You got Gaetjhe versus Fiziev 2 in the co-main event. I was actually at that first one. And we'll get into all of the amazing fights on the card. Let's just get straight into it today. I'm sipping on this latte. Let's go. If you hear any grunts from me, it's because of the shoulder is absolutely killing me. And it keeps dropping out the socket. But anyway, let's get into this main event. Alex Pereira versus Ankalaev. Now, this is something, as I said in the intro, we've been waiting for. And since Alex Pereira's rise to stardom, not only at middleweight, but especially since he moved up to that light heavyweight division when he captured the title, everybody has been saying, we need to see this guy get challenged in other areas of fighting because he's just so clinical, so dominant, so powerful on the feet, and he's just getting people out of there. And a lot of people have raised Ankalaev, Magomed Ankalaev, who is Dagestani, to kind of bring that wrestling and try and challenge Pereira in there, which, he may do. But I think a lot of people have kind of taken that Dagestani stereotype, taken the people like Khabib, taking the people like Islam Makhachev and a lot of other of these guys that have come through, perhaps Tagir as well. There's a bunch of names I could go through and kind of applied that. But if you watch Magomed Ankalaev's fights, of course he can wrestle, but he is a stand-up fighter. He's got power and the stuff that we're going to go through. But let's talk about Alex Pereira for a second here. He's on a 5-fight win streak at light heavyweight, obviously since, losing to Izzy in that rematch, that fourth fight that they had with each other. I've actually got the shot right here on the wall where Izzy knocked him out. Since then, he's been on an absolute tear. Comes up, fights Jan Blachowicz, which is quite a close fight. Jan Blachowicz is able to get him down. Very relevant in talking about this matchup with Ankalaev. But Pereira gets, I think it was a split decision win. I'm not sure. Somebody please correct me on that. But then he comes up, he makes the moves. He goes through a bunch of guys. Yuri Prohaska twice. Obviously gets Jamal Hill, Khalil Roundtree. And so these are absolutely huge opponents. And especially that last performance, I think, showed a definite maturation in Pereira's game. And it just shows the dominance that he's operating at the moment. But this is a guy who's a 2-division champ. This is a guy who surged to the top of the sport. And he's just not a normal human being. And I want to talk about Alex Pereira now in reference to Magomed Ankalaev. What do I think he's looking at in Ankalaev's game? What do I think about these two guys coming into this fight and what their strategies are going to be? For Pereira, he fought a southpaw in his most recent fight against Khalil Roundtree. I think it was, towards the end of last year in 2024. And a lot of people said, southpaws give Pereira problems. Southpaws are a better matchup for him because of that usual rear calf kick that he likes to throw. The thing that he did so much damage to all of his opponents to, especially Izzy in those 2 UFC fights. But you saw in that Khalil Roundtree fight, again, Alex Pereira's hip mobility, his ability to not telegraph that lead calf kick and actually, as I said, use that lead calf kick to go to Khalil Roundtree's front leg, which was his right because he's standing in southpaw. He also showed that ability in that Khalil Roundtree fight to push his opponent back and whip that rear body kick out of the orthodox stance, land it to the ribs, and eventually he decides to go high with it. And it does land a couple times partially. And you do see even in that moment, I think it was round 3 of that fight, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. Is it round 3? At one point, obviously, I think it was round 2. No, it was round 2. Alex Pereira throws the question mark kick. It was kind of a high kick question mark hybrid. You couldn't really tell. It was very well disguised by Pereira, but Khalil kind of ducks it, throws that lead right hand out of the southpaw stance and connects with Alex, kind of drops him for a second, and he gets back up. That's something that I've noticed about Alex Pereira. His recovery is insane. You know, that first Izzy fight in the UFC, Izzy towards the end of that first round gets him, rocks him bad, and he comes back able to compose himself, ends up putting the pressure on Izzy and winning that fight, TKOing him in the 5th round. You know, he's got a great ability to recompose himself, just physiologically and physically, like recover. And again, some of that is genetics, some of that is mentality. And you're never going to question Alex Pereira's heart inside the octagon there. And also in that Khalil Rountree fight, I think what I noticed more out than anything was his lower body attacks, his legs, the way he was able to kick, obviously going to that front calf kick, going to that rear body kick. But that rear teep, he kept throwing his rear teep and just stabbing it. I mean, there's different ways to throw a teep kick, right? You can, put your hips behind it and push your opponent back. You can throw the rear, fake it, go to the front one. But you can also have different intentions with the teep. You can just flick it out and stab your opponent with the ball of your feet. And that's what Pereira was doing to Khalil Rountree in that fight. And it was just absolutely taking the gas out of Rountree. And that's why you started to see such a huge decline in Khalil Rountree's energy. That's why he eventually gassed out. That's why he eventually was, fighting on pure heart up against the cage in that 4th round. His face was bleeding. Alex Pereira's right in his face, throwing hooks to the body, that patented left hook, and then eventually just gets absolutely walloped with the 2 right hands that drop him in the end, and his body just gives out on him. But it was also because of another thing, and that is Alex Pereira's distance control management, especially when he was fighting a shorter guy like Khalil Rountree. Khalil was having to throw 2, 3, 4 punches to even close the distance to land one against Pereira. And I think if you're Magomed Ankalaev, who's predominantly a southpaw fighter, who's seen that Khalil Rountree fight, who saw that Khalil had success when he was composed, when he dodged a head kick, came with that lead right hook, he's going to be thinking, okay, I'm taller, I'm bigger, I can close the distance easier. Because if there's one bad thing that I noticed that Pereira did, and this is me, the backseat fighter, this is me, somebody who's never had a fight in their life, this is me who has only been training Muay Thai for a number of months. So I'm not trying to criticize Pereira. I mean, he's a double champ for a reason, one of the greatest we've ever seen in the sport. But he does back up linearly. He does back up in a straight line. And because he's so tall, so big, so durable, has great defense with his arms and his hands and, ability to take shots lightly, just off the face, off the nose, off the lips. He doesn't always back out in the most disciplined way. Against somebody like Khalil, who was still able to land, by the way, but wasn't able to land as efficiently because he had to use so much energy to get across that distance. With Ankalaev, he's a bit bigger. And you see the way Ankalaev fights, for example, against Johnny Walker or someone like that. He'll be able to close that distance a bit easier, in my opinion. And those are the things I want to say about Alex Pereira in that most recent fight. And I think it's very relevant when introducing somebody like Ankalaev into a matchup like this. Now, Ankalaev has been kind of positioned as this, insane, pure Dagestani wrestler by majority of the media. I'm sure if First Take were to pick it up, if Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharp were to pick it up, they would also say something like that this guy is a pure wrestler. But if you watch the majority of Ankalaev's UFC career, at least, this is a guy who likes to stand up and knock his opponents out. This is a guy that really wants to take the boxing range with you. He fights in a heavy boxing stance, which has got him into trouble, right? This is an Ankalaev who is 21-1. That's 1 draw and 1 loss on his record. The draw came against Jan Blachowicz in his title fight, which we'll get into in a second. And that loss was a last-second buzzer-beater triangle that Paul Craig landed on him, right? So this is a guy who's got power in his hands. Obviously, it was only lost 1 time in a very weird circumstance. He's got 6 KOs in the UFC. And if we're being honest about him, just before I get into a little bit of the technical side of things, Magomed Ankalaev's career has been so strange in the UFC for me because my editor, Emmett Harvey, who's editing this podcast right now, shout out to him, he loves Magomed Ankalaev. And, it's not really a commonly held belief because Emmett, has him in such high regard, right? But his skill set is insane. He's very, very good. But his career has gone so weirdly. I mean, if I look at my notes, he's had 2 fights with Kutalaba. If you guys remember, Kutalaba just won very recently in an amazing performance. But that was the fight where Kutalaba was fighting Ankalaev. Ankalaev threw a left high kick. Kutalaba kind of blocked it and then just pretended to be hurt. The ref stepped in even though he was playing possum. They had to do the rematch. Magomed Ankalaev comes back, absolutely cracks him, knocks him out with a beautiful, beautiful, vicious check lead right hook, and then comes with the straight left, ground and pound finishes, absolutely demolishes Kutalaba in that rematch. He's a guy who had to fight Johnny Walker twice because I forget exactly what happened, but Ankalaev kneed Johnny Walker illegally up against the fence. Johnny Walker said he was all good to continue, but for some reason the doctor stepped in, so he had to rematch Johnny Walker. Ends up absolutely demolishing Johnny Walker, he lands a huge punch. It was a right hand, then follows up on the fence. One more right hand. Johnny Walker covers up his face, and that was all that she wrote. So this is a guy who's got vicious knockout power. And then what I wanted to talk about just now is in that draw that he had in the biggest fight of his life, in the title fight against Jan Blachowicz in the light heavyweight division. He kind of fought to what Dana White described as one of the worst title fights in history. Whilst watching it, I didn't think it was that bad, and I definitely thought Ankalaev deserved to win. But the way he fought wasn't conducive to winning, and it did risk himself losing. Excuse me. He did take a lot of leg kicks, and that's something that he's, addressed a bit more. I think in that second Johnny Walker fight, you could see that he was picking his legs up a little bit more, that lead leg. But he's a guy who loves to box. He's got an amazing rear power, rear left hand, that power that he possesses. That's his money shot, whether he goes up top to the head or down straight into the body, into the gut. That's his best shot, right? So he likes to be in that boxing stance. But when you're in a boxing stance, for anybody at home watching, try and get into a boxing stance, right? Try and just emulate, who your favorite boxer is. You get your feet wide. And once your feet are wide and your base is wide, it's very hard to pick your leg up. Whereas if you bring your feet closer together and you get into a bit of a more Muay Thai stance, you can pick that lead leg up better because your weight is down the middle of your body, in between your legs. When your base is wide, it opens you up to leg kicks because your weight is more distributed to either one of your legs or actually towards your front leg. And that leaves you susceptible, which is why Ankalaev has struggled with people kicking his legs. Now, obviously, in that Blachowicz fight, I think, broke Ankalaev's leg. I'm not sure what happened afterwards, and Ankalaev was still able to keep fighting, still went on. But you look at that Johnny Walker fight, Johnny Walker was still eating up his legs, albeit to the inside, which is different to what Pereira is going to throw. Pereira might throw some rear leg kicks to the inside of Ankalaev's front right leg, but as you saw in that Kilo Roundtree fight, he's going to be able to use that hip mobility, use his lead left leg, throw it to the outside of the calf on Ankalaev. And when somebody is susceptible to that, and they've shown they're susceptible to that, and then you put them in the cage with probably the best calf kicker I've ever seen in the sport in terms of Alex Pereira, it's definitely not a great matchup in that specific part of the fight. But, that's something that people have noticed for a long time. And even that Johnny Walker fight, you can hear it before Johnny Walker admittedly gets knocked out. So it didn't matter in that fight. John Kavanagh, his coach or former coach at SBG Ireland, was saying that outside calf kick is a beautiful shot. Take it while you can. So for Ankalaev, what do I think is really the tactics going into this, right? It's a mix of two things. Alex Pereira is one of the most dominant and imposing figures I've ever seen control the octagon. He pushes you back against the fence. He doesn't give you any time to think, breathe. And if anybody's ever even just sparred before in a light manner, if somebody is right in your space, not letting you move, not letting you circle out, not letting you get into rhythm, not letting you establish a range where you feel comfortable, it's impossible to get into rhythm, to fight, to be effective, because one, physically, you're limited, and two, mentally, you're now panicking a little bit. And you see that even at the highest levels. That's why when Izzy Adesanya fought him the second time, he said, you know what, I'm not going to panic when he pushes me against the fence. I'm going to chill, I'm going to take some shots, and I'm going to respond. That's because if you can push Alex Pereira back a little bit, then the fight does get easier. Now, that's so much easier said than done. But Ankalaev, as you've seen, has the ability to push his opponents back. I mean, he had Rakic running the entire fight. Did he do enough while pushing Rakic fight? Obviously not. I thought it was quite a disappointing performance by Ankalaev. But it is hard to, knock somebody out when they are really not trying to engage with you at all. That's what we've seen, criticism with Izzy Adesanya's career when he was in that huge title run, when he was fighting Jared Cannonier, when he was fighting Yoel Romero. A lot of people said, why is he not knocking these guys out? Because they didn't want to engage. So I do understand that part about it, especially with that Rakic fight that Ankalaev had. Ankalaev needs to adopt a similar approach to Khalil Rountree, because Khalil Rountree, despite getting very badly battered towards the end of that fight, did have moments of success. What failed Khalil Rountree was his size, was the clinical performance by Alex Pereira to slowly break him down in terms of his legs, then go to his body, then bust him up in the nose, then make the cut in the eye, then use the jab to make that cut worse. His eye was flapping, right? So first of all, that was a problem. But also his ability he had to throw 3 punch combinations, 3 to 4 to 5 punch combinations to even reach Alex. Now with Ankalaev, he's going to have more success if he takes that risk and throws the 3 to 4 to 5 punch combinations, because he'll be able to close it. He's a big boy himself now, much bigger than Khalil Rountree. Now, the big debate is Ankalaev going to wrestle? Should Ankalaev go in there and just wrestle him? The answer is oh shit. Oh, my shoulder. Told you it was going to happen. It's getting too animated. Ow. Should Ankalaev go in there and wrestle? Is he going to go in there and wrestle is a better question. I think he will try, and he's going to try and integrate that. I do think people are underestimating Alex Pereira's ability to, first of all, his takedown defense, but also his ability to stay safe on the bottom. I don't think, Ankalaev is going to submit him on top or anything like that. And I don't necessarily know if Ankalaev is going to wrestle him in the way that people thought he could. The way Henry Cejudo, for example, was like, Alex Pereira can't be pound for pound. He hasn't fought a wrestler. Throw him in there with Ankalaev and see what happens. Like Ankalaev is going to fight like Khabib. That's not how he fights. He's a stand-up fighter. He goes for knockouts. He wants big shots, right? The way he knocked out Kutula, but the way he knocked out Johnny Walker. I'm sure there's many more that I'm forgetting right now. But, he fought Anthony Smith, knocked him out, I believe. There's a bunch of fighters that, he's done incredible damage to. I think there's Lugian Bala as well. So this is a guy who can definitely hurt Pereira if he catches him. We've seen that. We've seen Pereira, take damage and get hurt. The question is, will he be able to integrate wrestling in a way that can positively influence his opportunities to land strikes on Pereira? I just believe that Pereira, obviously with the momentum, I do think that's a real thing in fighting. I don't think that's a term that is kind of one of those like intangible narrative terms. I do believe momentum is everything in sport at the highest level, whether that's in fighting, whether that's in the NBA, whether that's in, football or NFL or hockey or whatever it is, whatever sport you're in. When you're winning, that produces more winning. Winning produces more winning, and losing produces more losing. It's much harder to get back on the track than stay on it, right? So I do think that the momentum was with Pereira, but people have to remember that he is getting older. He did take a lot of damage in that Pereira fight. Getting dropped is no joke. In that Khalil Rountree fight, he did get knocked out by Izzy. He did take some shots against his other opponents in Yuri Prohaska. But he's so dominant. He's so technical. He spars so much. It's almost like Strickland. You see him sparring on his Instagram very often, whether he's traveling and he's in South Korea, whether he's in Australia doing conferences. He's always sparring with the top guys, and he does it without headgear. Now, safety-wise, I want to get a doctor on to speak about whether headgear actually protects you or not in terms of CT, in terms of damage, in terms of, brain and an impact in sparring. But what it definitely does do when you don't wear it is get yourself used to seeing shots in a more realistic way. Sparring in a fashion that resembles or mirrors as close as possible a real fight. And Pereira's octagon experience and just fight experience is obviously off the charts. So the way he fights, so stand up and with that demon of a left hook, the abilities and the kicks he has, as I said, in his teeps, his front calf kick, then he's going to be using that rear body kick, the ability to go high that indeed got him in trouble against Khalil. I just don't see an avenue of victory for Ankalaev unless we see that he is just so dominant on the ground that it's something that I don't expect. So let me know what you guys think. I think Alex Pereira is going to get the finish, or he's going to, have a 5-round war with this guy. And I think Alex Pereira is going to come out on top. I don't think it's going to be easy. I do believe it's a difficult matchup because Ankalaev is a tough guy. I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he broke his leg in that Jan Blachowicz fight and still kept going after the leg kicks. So he does have the heart of a champion. I just don't believe it's his time yet. I believe Alex Pereira is going to get this win. And after that, you never know what fight we're talking about then. Maybe we're talking about a heavyweight matchup with him and Tom Aspinall for International Fight Week, assuming John Jones does not come back in time. Or we see, him fight the winner of John Jones versus Aspinall. It could get absolutely crazy if Pereira secures his win because there'll be nobody else really to fight, at least in the immediate future for him at light heavyweight, and there'll be so many more options for him. So I think if you're a fan of a sport, if you're a neutral, you're probably hoping for Alex Pereira to win this fight. Obviously, if you're behind Magomed Ankalaev, that makes sense too. But my prediction is Alex Pereira to get the knockout this weekend. Oh, I don't know. I've tried to go knockout. I don't believe in my heart, but I do see Alex Pereira winning. It could be a knockout, could be a 5-round war. But you guys, let me know. Cool. I got through that segment with my shoulder dropping out the socket only fractionally. That's a success in my book. Let me move on to Justin Gaetjhe versus Fiziev 2. This is a rematch that came up on short notice, obviously. Initially it was going to be Dan Hooker versus Justin Gaetjhe, and that's a fight that I think the entire MMA community and even outside of, kind of people that are doing podcasts like me or watching every week were interested in, because that was going to be guaranteed violence. And it always is with Justin Gaetjhe, and it always is with Dan Hooker. And when you add that into a sum, or you add that into an equation, the sum is just absolute pure violence. And it would have been amazing. It would have been a spectacle, to say the least. But on short notice, if you couldn't get one of the most elite guys like Charles Oliveira, who's probably positioning himself for a title shot very soon, if you can get an Arman Sarukian, who probably doesn't want to fight somebody like Justin Gaetjhe on short notice, if you couldn't get Dustin Poirier because he's lined up for a really big retirement fight in the summer, Fiziev is the answer. Because I was at the first fight these guys had in London a couple years ago, and it was electric. It was in a very, very close fight, in a 3-round fight, as it is again this time. And in that first fight, obviously, Fiziev, you could tell immediately in that fight when they fought the first time that Fiziev had the speed advantage. He just did. And that's not to say that Justin Gaetjhe is slow. It's not to say Justin Gaetjhe isn't technical. Fiziev is just an absolute wonder kid when it comes to throwing shots with speed. And it was an extremely close fight, obviously. If I remember that first round, I thought Fiziev won. I thought he was landing the better shots. And I thought, he was landing that lead hook. He was throwing uppercuts with vicious pace, even a rear uppercut with vicious pace and front lead uppercuts that were really causing some worry to Justin Gaetjhe. And I think that was the first time I kind of noticed that habit that Justin Gaetjhe has, is that when you crash the space, he's going to hunch over. And at the end of that first round, you see Fiziev go for what I believe is a couple punches, and then tries to throw like a rear knee, a Muay Thai rear knee. And Justin Gaetjhe kind of folds forward into it, and it kind of almost connects. And that's something that we saw in Justin Gaethje's most recent fight against Max Holloway, where he got absolutely knocked out in the end. But what was the biggest factor in that fight was that Max Holloway's team had done their tape study. They understood that if you throw a kick, if you throw a big attack, if you make a big movement, Justin Gaethje's going to bite and he's going to move forward. That's why when Max Holloway threw that spinning back kick, it broke Justin Gaethje's nose, because he leans forward and he threw it 3 or 4 times in the fight and it landed every single time. It's just a habit that Justin Gaethje has. Has he fixed that since that Max Holloway fight? I don't know. But the other narrative that I want to, oh my God, I'm so mad at myself. And I'm glad that I'm going to keep this in, because that's a very, very important part that I want to dispel on narratives. Narratives. That's what kills genuine sports media. That's what ESPN's First Take runs with. And I know I'm going after First Take, and I love what they do in terms of an entertainment factor. But if I want to be the space that I want to be, I can't be running with narratives. So I apologize for using that term. But what I will say is the other factor playing into this fight, this rematch, is that this time Justin Gaethje is coming off what I believe is probably the most devastating knockout I've ever seen. And that's for two reasons. Obviously, in the last 10 seconds of the fight, UFC 300, one of the most viral moments, probably the craziest knockout of all time, just in terms of the occasion, just in terms of the fight, just in terms of the crowd reaction, Joe Rogan screaming on the microphone, all of that stuff. And obviously seeing Justin Gaethje get flatlined face down. But it wasn't just the fact that it was a big knockout that made it, impactful and kind of gruesome in a way. It was the 5 rounds of damage that Justin Gaethje clearly accumulated from the back spinning kick that broke his nose very early on, to the amount of punches Max Holloway was just on. And he accumulated so much damage to then get that huge knockout shot that left him unconscious for a couple of minutes there. That's what made it an incredibly tough knockout. And that's a big factor for me, because you don't get better from that. You just don't. Your ability to take a shot doesn't get better. Your reaction time doesn't get better. Your speed doesn't get better. Your fight IQ doesn't get better. Or maybe your fight IQ does get better, but your ability to see shots coming doesn't get better. And that's what I have in terms of a worry in my brain and my logic when it comes to this fight for Justin Gaethje, because it is a huge risk at this point to be still in there after such a damaging fight. And I know it's been a year since then, but it's one of those things that must be like a car crash for your brain. And to be put out that way, to step into the fight, I mean, such warrior spirit from Justin Gaethje in the last 10 seconds of that fight. But to be put out like that, I'm sure really, really affected him, not just professionally, obviously having to take a break, but personally as well. And that's something we should really talk about when it comes to people like Justin Gaethje, who have given so much of not only their professional career to the sport, but obviously their life in the way that he fights. It's a very, war or kill or be killed style, I should say. But going back to Fiziev and their first fight in terms of analysis, again, that first round I think went to Fiziev. End of the round, throws that knee, lands pretty decently. That second round, contested in my opinion. You could go either way. And Justin Gaethje and him were trading. Justin Gaethje, I think Justin Gaethje realized there's a little bit of a speed advantage, so he started adding punches to his combinations. When he would land on Fiziev, he'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, land some good hooks around the side of the guard of Fiziev's. And I want to talk about that third round and kind of bring it back to that kind of long discussion I had about the damage Justin Gaethje's taken. In that third round, what you see is incredibly fast hooks from Fiziev to open the third round, lands on Gaethje and stings him really bad, and shakes him. You see it visibly. He kind of gets shaken in his feet, but as Justin Gaethje does, he's able to continue. And there's a couple of uppercuts in there as well. The rest of that round, Justin Gaethje does something that we hadn't seen from him so far in his UFC career. He composed himself, started fight behind a beautiful jab that in the end really won him the fight. Starts landing that beautiful, educated jab. Takes the fight, in my opinion, there. And when I was at the arena, that's what I thought as well, that Justin Gaethje deserved to win that fight. My only issue is, if Fiziev, although he's coming for himself off a big break from a knee injury and not fought in a while, so ring rust I do believe is real. But him now, if he lands that shot again against Justin Gaethje, I think it's over. And that's something that is very, that's conjecture. That's complete and utter just, how I feel. It's a gut feeling. But I just have I feel like I have a deep understanding and respect for what fighters do. And I have a deep understanding for the risks and consequences of getting knocked out and taking that much damage as Justin Gaethje has. It's not an infinite well. You can't keep going to that resource of being able to take shots. It's something that eventually dries up in terms of that well metaphor. Because, look, Justin Gaethje coming off that huge knockout, if he takes those huge, fast, speedy left hooks again, I think it could be all she wrote. And that's why, even though Fiziev is coming off what I consider a huge break, he's going to be rusty. Hasn't fought a long time, coming off a big injury. At the end of the day, if he lands those hooks again, I think he's going to win. And I think he's going to be able to finish Justin Gaethje in this fight. And that's my prediction. I hate to do it. But I do believe that Fiziev is going to get the job done this weekend at UFC 313 in the co-main event. And it's definitely something that I didn't really consider. You know, when the fight first got booked, I was like, okay, Justin Gaethje is still going to win this fight. But for some reason, I just have it in my heart that Gaethje's going to lose this weekend to Fiziev. So that's what I'm saying. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and let me know if I'm just being a hater or being too sensitive about the damage he was taking. And I'm going to move on now to the next fight on the card, which is Bahamondes versus Jalin Turner. Bahamondes, obviously a Chilean fighter, fought at UFC, Noche UFC in the Sphere, I believe, against Torres. And that was just an absolute clinical performance. If you know anything about Bahamondes, he's a 6'3", huge lightweight, lots of UFC experience. And the way he fought in that fight was just absolutely beautiful. The slip back right hand, he landed it twice in a row. And absolutely demolished Torres in front of the Sphere crowd in a historical event. And I even remember watching him against Giagos in the UFC as well. I believe it was in, my shoulder. I believe it was in the Apex. And in that fight, you just see his ability to switch stances. He's fighting out of the orthodox. Whenever he wants to throw those kicks, he switches to the orthodox stance, to the southpaw stance, excuse me. And in that final sequence, you see him switch to that southpaw stance and just throw the throw the high kick, the left high kick, absolutely destroys Giagos, lays him out up against the fence. And he's fighting somebody in Jalin Turner, who is one of the most skilled guys, the most exciting guys in the UFC, not just at lightweight because he's so big. You know, he really could be fighting at welterweight, but decides to cut down to lightweight to try and get that advantage. But he's been in there with some of the best of them. And this is a guy that at some point in his UFC career, in Jalin Turner, was on a 5-fight win streak. And that was when he was fighting Tulibao. That was when he was fighting Brock Weaver, Uros Medic, Jamie Malarkey, Brad Riddell. So this is a guy who was on a 5-fight win streak, was kind of the next big thing in the lightweight division. And he came up against Gamrot. He lost a split decision. Came up against Dan Hooker, went to war with him last summer. I think in the fight that Dan Hooker actually broke his hand. And then he comes in, he fights Bobby Green at the time, who is now King Green, who was also fighting on this card. Almost kills him. You know, the ref doesn't step in when Bobby Green gets hurt, and the ground and pound is just vicious, 20 to 30 unanswered shots to kind of the back of the head. The referee really should be have faced punishment for that, in my opinion. And then obviously against Renato Moicano, almost delivers just an absolutely beautiful knockout. Should have followed it up for the ground and pound at UFC 300, but decides not to. And Moicano ends up getting the win by KO. It was such a weird pieces of circumstances that I've kind of seen an inconsistency to Jalin Turner's career that doesn't really represent his ability and skill set, as I said. So I am so excited for this fight because it's two huge lightweights. 6'3" for the lightweight division is a tough cut. I imagine they're going to be both ready. They're both very good strikers, very technical. And for me, the only question in terms of Jalin Turner really is his cardio. Is that cut to lightweight affecting his ability to stay in the fight, to keep mentally aware, to keep his mind and body connected in terms of asking it to do the things that he needs to do in the second to third rounds? Because when you're cutting that much weight, as I imagine he is, you see him standing next to lightweights or standing next to welterweights and middleweights. He looks bigger than them. It's ridiculous that this guy's able to make lightweight. So I'm so excited for this fight. I think it's going to be an absolute banger. Bahamondes is landing, wheel kicks and obviously that left hike against Giagos, and his ability to slip back out of range is absolutely incredible. And another guy who's able to slip back out of range is Mauricio Ruffy. Now this guy, he is genuinely like the second coming of Conor McGregor. It's so, the resemblance in the fight style is uncanny. It's like an absolute regen. It's like an orthodox Brazilian, not orthodox in terms of the religion, in terms of the fight stance. He fights orthodox, which is opposite to obviously Conor McGregor's southpaw, but it's kind of that similar bladed style, that flow. He's a Brazilian, Conor is Irish, but he also has like the similar cardio issues as Conor as well. But we saw Mauricio Ruffy obviously debut in the UFC against Jamie Malarkey. Absolutely incredible performance. And then in his most recent fight against the short notice James John Top from Peru, obviously John Top comes in on short notice. I think it was a catch weight fight. Excuse me. And Mauricio Ruffy was styling in that fight, obviously. And I think it was in the Jimmy Malaki fight. He goes to that scissor sweep. In the John Top fight, he was throwing like no look shovel hooks. It was beautiful. I mean, this guy really is, for me, the next big star in the UFC. And if he can keep stacking wins, especially against a big name like Bobby Green, King Green, excuse me, that's a huge name. And it's going to be a stand-up fight. It's going to be a fight that's going to allow him, if he is on, to capture that highlight moment to boost his stardom even more, because he really is, at only 28 years old, one of the most promising prospects for me in terms of the UFC, and somebody I'm so excited to watch. I'm happy that he's, been relatively active since he's got to the UFC. I mean, he fought last May in 2024 against Jamie Malaki. He then came back and fought in November. It's March again. So if he can keep up this level of activity, if he can keep up the victories, you never know how far he could go. Obviously, fighting at lightweight, he is going to, struggle against the more wrestling heavy guys. But you do want to see him there, if he can, be in there with the best. And, I was listening to UFC Embedded this week on the YouTube, and Kyle Borrello was saying, this is the most talented guy I've ever seen in martial arts. Now, to come from somebody who's obviously not reached, the best in terms of, championship level yet, but, still in the top 10 of the middleweight division in Kyle Borrello, part of the Fighting Nerds, with someone like Gene Silva, who's knocking everybody out, Carlos Prates, who's knocking everybody out. This group is going absolutely insane, and they're a great brand for the UFC and the MMA community. To say that Mauricio Ruffy, out of all of those guys, is the most talented and everybody's ever seen in his life, it's a very big compliment, but it shows. And for me, he's probably one of my favorite fights coming up. And I'm just really, really, really excited to watch him fight this weekend. And the last fight on the main card that I wanted to talk about is obviously Lucindo is fighting this weekend. If you guys don't know Lucindo, she is a absolute beast in terms of this women's strawweight division. Yasmin Lucindo, I think what draws me to her is that she's so young and that she's had already a lot of success in UFC. I think she's only 23, so similar age to me and my friends. So to see somebody like her go in there in 2024, get 2 victories in the UFC, I think she's on a 4-fight win streak, maybe even more. I think it must be 4-fight win streak in terms of 2023 to 2024. If I go into her record, I can have a look. She gets a submission win against Poliana Viana and against Brogan Walker. Then comes into 2024, wins over Marina Rodriguez again and Karina Kowalkiewicz as well. If I butchered that name, I'm sorry. But she's also been active. She fought on that May 4th card where Mauricio Ruffy was fighting. She fought in October again at UFC 307. And now we're going to see her at UFC 313. So this is an absolute huge card to go through. And I'm expecting Lucindo to get the job done. Again, as I said with Alex Pereira, momentum is everything, especially when you're young and you're prime at 23 years old in a women's strawweight division and a big star like her. I'm sure momentum is going to carry her through, and I'm sure she's going to be more confident than ever because there's a difference between being young and not having experience, right? There's if you're like when it was Raul Rojas, what the hell did I just say? Raul Rosas Jr., when he came in, he didn't have that much experience. When you put him against C-Rod, he lost. And C-Rod is the guy that just destroys everybody up-and-comers, every up-and-comer. But that's different. She's already got, so much experience in the UFC, 4-fight win streak at 23 years old. That's very, very impressive. But what I wanted to say about this fight is there's huge, huge fighters on the undercard of the prelims, I should say. You've got Curtis Blades fighting, which I don't know if many people knew. You've got Curtis Blades fighting as the, featured prelim against Rusvan Kuniev. You've got Joshua Van, who I think is probably one of my other favorite fighters in the UFC at the moment. Such nice boxing, ability to just take damage, go to war, really puts it all on the line. And this is a guy who has had a lot of success in recent times. He was supposed to fight Bruno Silva, but he beat Cody Durden most recently in December, not too long ago. He fought Edgar Chairez as well. So this is a guy who really, really is exciting. I think he's on a 4-fight win streak, and he himself is very young, kind of like Lucindo. He's only 23 years old. So I'm very, very excited to see him back in the octagon here this weekend against somebody like Ray Surya, who's undefeated 10-0. You've also got Bruno Ferreira on there against Armen Petrosyan. Armen Petrosyan, obviously, a big, important name in terms of that recent fight that he had against Shara Bullet. You know, he's the guy that got double bulleted, double spinning back fisted. So that's pause. Yo. And obviously Alex Morono, who's also a kind of a big name if people are big watchers of this sport. Ozzy Diaz, who I've spoken about before on the podcast on the early prelims, as well as Chris Gutierrez, who I spoke about recently as well. So this is a huge, huge card. I'm hoping everybody has a great time watching it. And just to end the episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about appreciating greatness in sports, specifically fighting, obviously, for this podcast. But this is something that's come up for me because I've been watching a lot of the NBA. I'm a Lakers fan, I'm a LeBron fan, and it's been a topic of discussion in the mainstream media, finally, on places like ESPN's First Take with Stephen A. Smith, Brian Windhorst, Gilbert Arenas were speaking about it. The question is, or the topic is, you know, do we appreciate as, you know, consumers of sports, as sports fans, as sports media, do we appreciate greatness enough? And I think the overwhelming answer for me is no. And I do understand that kind of the tribalism, the rivalries, that love and hate, like you support your guy, you don't like the other guy, it comes into play, and it's all part of it, right? Especially if you're a fan. But there has to be a high level of respect for athletes. So when someone like LeBron James scores 50,000 points, the entire basketball world should understand that that's probably never going to be done again. And there should be a concerted effort to constantly remind people of that, especially if you're on a big media platform like ESPN's First Take. If you're on Get Up on ESPN, you know, it's your responsibility to direct the viewer, direct the consumer towards a more respectful sporting environment where you are appreciating the greats. The reason I bring that up is because in fighting, I think we do the same. It's something that I've seen, you know, more recently when I had to talk about Izzy Adesanya losing against Imavov. And I think, I will say, I think it is a little bit different when it comes to fighting because the consequences are so different. Because when you decline in basketball as an athlete, and LeBron James hasn't yet, that's why he's the GOAT, I'll say that right here. But when you decline in basketball, it's slightly different to when you decline in fighting. Right? When you decline in basketball, you just stop averaging. You know, when you were averaging 25 every season, you're averaging 22. Then you're averaging 18. Then you're averaging 13. And your minutes are coming down. And your efficiency is coming down. The thing is, when your athleticism goes in fighting and when those physical attributes start to diminish and when you've taken more damage, it's not that your just stats are going down or there's more losses on your team record or your role is diminished on your team. What it means is you're getting punched in the head more. What it means is you're getting physical damage. What it means is you're getting knocked out. There's more life risks, real physical health consequences. So I think at the end of the day, when it comes to hype trains and getting behind fighters, there just needs to be more respect for what these guys are doing, and especially for the ones who have achieved consistent greatness in all sports, but especially fighting. So when somebody like Izzy Adesanya is probably, you know, not going to ever get back to title defense after title defense after title defense, I'm sure some people are thinking, damn, I really should have appreciated him for what he was doing when he was doing it. You know, the same way people need to appreciate Alex Pereira right now in this very second for what he's done in this sport before he fights Magomed Ankalaev, because this is fighting. Anything can happen. Magomed Ankalaev could win this weekend. Does that mean you'll see. If that happens, everybody will be like, oh, Alex Pereira was really never that good. He was fraud checked. You know, these terms that are so detrimental to growing this space in a healthy manner. You know, I really try to stay away from terms like casual. You know, it was a big fight that very early on when I started this podcast, you can go back on my TikTok, started an absolute war in the comments when I said we need to stop calling each other casuals. You know, it's a huge thing to say it's a huge piece of importance for me to not use terms like fraud check, to not use terms like casual, to not use terms that really hinder growth or healthy growth in this space. So I'll just end by saying, in terms of this week's card, in terms of in general, whether that's this sport or whatever, appreciate the greats, appreciate the great ones, because as fans, we always expect there to be another great one. But all of them are great in their own separate ways. They all do different great things. And if you don't appreciate somebody like Alex Pereira, there isn't going to be another Alex Pereira. There isn't going to be another guy who comes in from a kickboxing background and gets to a title in 3 fights, wins the title, goes up to light heavyweight, goes on an absolute tear, 5-fight win streak, potentially wins this weekend, goes up again to the heavyweight division. Like, it's not going to happen. So, you know, whether it's fucking LeBron James or it's Alex Pereira or it's Lewis Hamilton, you know, just enjoy the great ones. And that's all I really want to say. I'm signing off. I got one shoulder. It's hurting so bad right now. But yes, I'm hoping everybody's having a good day, having a good week. And I'm excited to be back on the podcast. Shout out to Emmett for helping me edit these videos. Welcome to the team, my brother. And, you know, we're going to be back we're going to have a lot more time now because I ain't going to be training. I ain't going to be doing other stuff. So, I'm going to have a lot more time to get back into the podcast. We'll have a fight reaction this weekend for you with much better miking than I've had before. I'm excited. You'll see me screaming at the television like always. Everybody stay safe. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for watching on YouTube. If you're doing that, subscribe. And I'll see you next time for episode 23 of the Backseat Fighter podcast. Thank you so much.